All right, you all. So the program that you have in Canvas to use the concepts that we're working on here in our last unit of the class, natural selection agent, and epidemiology, is going to target just one particular type of infection. And in this case, it's smallpox. One of the reasons why is smallpox is very intensely studied and well understood. Another reason why is that smallpox has been for many thousands of years in Africa, Europe, and Asia, a really important agent of natural selection. As you took a look at in a previous part of Unit 5 with origins and dispersal, individuals who left the so-called old world, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and migrated into the Americas prior to 10,000 years ago, at the climate change event that caused the Beringia land bridge to become flooded and not be able to have people walking back and forth or really go back and forth between those two continental areas. Those individuals in the Americas had never met or encountered that particular pathogen or that disease until much, much more recently. So part of the reason that's also another great program is you get a look at what happens when a brand new infection meets a population that has not experienced interaction with that species before. And right, it's very heart-rending. But so it's got three big concepts that go along with it, plus our everyday lives. So what we're looking at here in this image is a photograph taken in the 1970s of a woman in a hospital who was infected with this species. So do remember that we're looking at with these pathogens that we started on last week, bacteria, virus, fungal infections, parasitic infections, we are looking at other organisms. They need a habitat and an environment so that they can send their genetic combinations on to the future. They evolve like any other living thing evolves. They evolve by accumulating small mutations over time. So in this particular case, this woman was infected at one of the very last periods of time where people could be naturally infected with this species, with smallpox, in the 1970s, and you can see how really devastating it is to your system. Now, I did include this particular photo because I didn't make the blackouts to her eye, and it isn't listed by her name, other than she did recover. They did save her. But one of the things you're learning about this pathogen, smallpox, is that it causes such giant disruption that people that have had the disease and recovered do have noticeable scarring on the surface of their skin for life. So those of you that are looking at some other types of courses where you're seeing historic photos for studies of populations towards the end of the century and the very early beginnings of the 1900s, where there is photography, you might see images where it looks like many in the population have had something going on with their skin. And those dents and gouges typically are smallpox. All right, so we're also going to work on, as we wrap this up, the vocabulary terms variolation and inoculation versus vaccination. And as we finish up, we will look at the term immunization so that you just have a much more modern college student understanding of the core vocabulary. All right, move forward a little bit. So taxonomy. Our class all along has been about, right, your life science requirements. So again, when we are looking at species, living things, they have a place in the taxonomic chart. So these are not inorganic substances that might cause problems with the way that our system can work. These are other species. So viruses themselves are their own taxonomic group, and then hierarchy going down to genus, species, and subspecies for these. Okay, so this, you all, is the taxonomic species identification for smallpox. It is, and I'll just type it in so it saves a little bit longer, orthopox virus. So orthopox is the genus, variola, that's its species, and then it does have a subspecies, and this one is, its subspecies is major. So that means, again, to work on things we looked at last week, that smallpox has two races. If there's a subspecies in biology, then there's a race. That's why also, as you learned earlier in your reading last week, that humans don't come in biological races because we're all genus Homo, species Sapiens, and we don't have any other subspecies. So, but these do, so they have. So there's a major, guess what the other one is? Minor. But the one you're looking at in your program, and the one that's really played a role in our genetics of modern living humans right now, is orthopox variola major. So that's its species name. So simple type of question, right? You were in class, you saw this. All right. Our data for the probably mainly at least 1800s to the 1900s to accidental infections that might still happen today is that 30% of people who contract, that are adults, that contract this virus die, are not savable no matter what kind of medical help is available. And this 30% level is what we see in populations that have been in contact with the species or that pathogen for multiple generations at the minimum. So for instance, like you have in the film, in the Middle East, Europeans, Africans, Asian populations, if someone got sick, and usually this would happen while you were a child, they expected a minimum of 3 out of those 10 people, or 3.5 out of those 10 people, to die. That's why there's a history segment in the program that you have that goes along that talks about how royal families in some places in the world would not advance as a prince that might move on to kingdom, or a royal child in the family who might become emperor or a king, unless they had already survived the virus. It wasn't worth the chaos that would happen if you had a young person who contracted this and then passed away, and then what are you going to do then? So history plays a role in understanding this one. Now, so again, so if your population had already had in every generation this present in your population, in this one, so that means that for thousands of years, probably minimum 5,000 years for humans, then smallpox was an endemic infection, always present, coming around on a regular basis. Somebody always had it, and then it was passed on. Now, what we saw with, for instance, the movement of Europeans to the Americas, beginning in approximately the 1400s and into the 1500s, is what they recorded when they gave that disease to Native Americans or tribal populations in the Americas, that they were seeing 90% death. So 9 out of 10 of the people that got sick did die from it, and they were shocked. They didn't know exactly why that was happening. They wrote it down. Now, why were they able to know that these people had the same disease? Because as you saw in that first image, that smallpox has those skin lesions that are very identifiable. They are large, they are full of white cells, or what you would call pus, and they have kind of a little dent in the middle, and they'll be all over the face, neck, they'll be inside the mouth, which they would have been able to see, arms, hands, legs, and on the torso. Really, really not difficult for these early historic period populations or historians to write about. So that was when they first encountered the pathogen. No one in their population had ever had it before. Why? Because they had left the old world before the disease made the jump to humans. So again, we're seeing it probably first emerge in places like ancient Egypt, something in the 3000 BC range, BCE, before the current era. That means 5,000 years ago. Native Americans, indigenous populations, tribal people in North, Central, and South America did not get this because they'd already moved out of that area. Right? Remember the dates? Between 10 and 20,000 years ago, most of them. So they never met it. They had never had it before. So thinking about natural selection, why would the death rate be less for populations that had an endemic association with the pathogen, right, with the species? Remember, endemic, it's always possible, and natural selection, nature selects. Now, to just go onto the side a little bit, also to practice this term and this concept as we wrap up the course, all of you have lived in a society where you see advertisements for things constantly, and where in some cases we will see advertisements for things that you can purchase easily that will help you clean up or wipe out, let's say, insect species in and around your house. But why is it that you've also seen lots of advertisements that say that they have a new formula, that it's an improved formula, that you should buy this newest upgrade for Black Flag or some of those types of things that, let's say, you're going to spray on cockroaches or ants or other bugs that you might not want in your environment. Why is it that they need those upgrades all the time? And that's because, right, when you spray an entire population with a natural selective agent, so you're not the agent. When you're holding the can of spray, you're going to try to spray, let's say, cockroaches. In other countries, there'll be other ones that they worry about. When you're holding the can, then you are the vector. The human with the can, vocabulary practice, is the vector. How is it getting there? We're bringing it there and we are spraying it. The chemicals in the can are the agent. That's the actual cause. If you step on them, you are the agent. If you can stomp them, then you're the agent. But what do we see when we spray pathogens with insect pathogens with the spray? That it never kills all of them. Some of them just shake it off and run. So then what happens, right? For these. So what happens with natural selection, take this one back. What happens with natural selection is that the ones you kill with the agent, they go out of the gene pool. Right? Those that were genetically killable. The survivors are going to be parents. I'm saying parent, but you know they're passing along their gametes, their genetics. They're going to be parents. So the children are the offspring of the stronger genetic combination. You do that over and over and over again, right? Because insects, for instance, are laying eggs every few days. in a very short period of time, all you've got are the offspring that never died from that chemical. Why? Because they are children of the survivors. So why is the death rate less in Europe, starting in the 1400s, than it is in the Americas, the Caribbean, and so forth? Because Europe, China, Africa, they had been infected over and over and over again. So all their children were children that had the immune system that handled it better. And they still lost 3 out of 10. When it meets the whole brand new population that has not been, right, filtered or selected, then initially it wipes out a huge number. But within about a century, we see that, let's say with Native Americans, that their death rate when they get smallpox is approximately the same, about 3 out of 10. The massive amount of loss of people in the Americas, the almost entire wipeout of all the tribes of the Caribbean, was because of the disease, not necessarily because of violence. Violence was part of it, but they would not have been able to get rid of that many people, right? Because there were millions upon millions of people. So really the full demise of the Mexica or Aztec area in Mexico was overwhelmingly disease that had been passed on from their first meats. Okay, now pox. What do all pox infections have, right? Because nowadays there's also chicken pox, cow pox. There's something called monkey pox. That's not a joke. There is a variant called this. What do they all have in common? Poxuol was a generic term for infections that, typing, cause blistering rashes. Smallpox is the most dangerous. All right, so if you're reading, let's say something in classical literature class, Shakespeare or something, and somebody says a pox on you, that means shut up and die. I want you dead. It's really, really rude. We use the F-bomb and a bunch of other terms today, but pox on you, that's not just the little finger shaking. That's walk away and die. So pox. All right, clearing up a couple vocabulary words. Let's keep going. What about bacteria? Now, bacteria are things that we worry about constantly, and you've seen other types of news and stories about how we are not handling bacterial infections in the modern world as well as we did even 15 to 20 years ago. So what about bacterial pathogens? Bacteria are an entirely different taxonomic group. They belong in their own categories of organisms. We cannot find right now any real clear evidence for how ancient viruses are, but as we looked at earlier in the class, bacteria are the descendants of the planet's oldest living things, and they are everywhere, on everything, and in everything. So but they are different. The way that they survive and the way that they reproduce is different. So they are much larger, they're much easier to see in a microscope. So with the invention of microscopes, specialists, doctors, curiosity, scientists, they were able to see bacteria earlier. As you're learning about in your handout and in this unit, viruses are so incredibly tiny, it was impossible to see them in any form of microscope until well into the 1950s. And that's why the word virus has the definition that it does in your vocabulary list. So we manage bacteria differently. Bacteria are managed by antibiotics. So that's what you take if you know that you are having a bacterial infection. They may also work on some other kinds of pathogens, but antibiotics do nothing to help you manage a virus. Viruses are different. Bacteria live inside you by right? By making new copies of themselves and making bigger and bigger and bigger colonies. Viruses reproduce themselves by going inside your cells. They kick out your DNA in the cell and insert their own, so that when your cell divides, your body is creating more virus. So it has to be managed differently. So antibiotics, you take them after you know you're infected and after you identify what species of pathogen. So antibiotics actually are trying to kill that invading species from the exterior. What you've been learning about in this unit, inoculation or vaccination. We're going to look at those in more detail in a moment. Inoculation or vaccination is for virus. Viruses are handled this way. Bacteria handled in antibiotics. So when people are sick in countries or areas where they just let somebody come up to a pharmacy and say, I want to buy these pills, and they just let them do it when they don't know if it's even a bacterial infection or something else. This is why in the world our antibiotics are starting to not work anymore, because oftentimes they'll come in and take these and what they actually had was a viral infection, so they do nothing. But what they do is enact natural selection on those species that are in there, and over time it's so that we can't get rid of those. So it's a lot like spraying our insects. Inoculation or vaccination must be taken before infection to really give you the best outcome, because they stimulate your immune system. That's what they're supposed to do. They're a warrant, be on the lookout, waiting for those organisms to get into your system. And then when they do, they capture them right away, lock and key, and carry them away to another part of your body so that they can't go into your skin or your brain or your lungs or your digestive system or whatever it is. So completely different strategy. So here's one you can take a look at, particularly if you're having conversations with yourself or with other people who are saying, oh no, I can be at the very end. I don't need to have a vaccination for whatever's going on at this particular time, chicken pox or measles or right, or these coronavirus or things like that. And again, it's a lot of times because they just don't know or aren't real comfortable with the concept that you don't want to be last in line for this, that this is something you have to do ahead of time. It's not like going and getting an antibiotic when you think you're sick or you know it's already around. Because if you're already been exposed, then they're already living inside you. And what we take for them doesn't kill them. What we do then is try to keep you alive, but it doesn't, right? Vaccination doesn't kill those particles or those species, but antibiotics do. So they're molecules or compounds that treat infections by the species because they can kill them off, because those species aren't you. But since a virus gets inside your cells and kicks out your DNA and inserts their own, then they're living inside your systems, and we cannot totally kill them that way, because then we'd be, right, killing your lungs, killing your liver, killing your brain, killing your digestive system. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to understand what's different between the treatment of the two. So what does a vaccine do? It stimulates immunity. Right. So thinking about antigens and antibodies from last week, and then in the program, smallpox steadily again, a classic. In your notes, you want to be sure you have what was the first effort to try to manage deaths for this pathogen. It's part of the program. The first effort there, when they talk about how horrible it is in the modern world, and then they move on to looking historically. And that's the part of the program that talks about the high status European woman who was living, visiting, and interacting with people in the Middle East, and was shocked to find out that they had a technique in the Middle East to manage this that worked very, very well. And right, there's that cultural ranking that we grow up always thinking our area is so much more in the know, so much better, so much more successful than other parts of the world. It's frequently not accurate. And that first effort was called inoculation or variolation. Inoculation or variolation. So what did they use in order to inoculate or variolate? That's the earlier of them. That's the part you probably didn't want to look at or hear. They actually took from those blisters full of the pus, because it had the virus in it, they took it from someone who was sick and they scraped it on the surface of your skin so that you had a little bit of a raw spot in your skin. They did not put it in your blood. They did not put it in your mouth. You didn't swallow it. They put it on your skin. And when they did that, they did get some deaths, but they didn't get the 30% deaths that they would have gotten. So this is what inoculation or variolation was initially. It worked. For those with inoculation or variolation in that technique, because they're giving you the actual disease, right? The actual orthopox variola major virus, then your immune system develops or recognizes lock and key perfectly that particular disease, and it gave lifetime immunity. So this is what you need in your notes. That's why you have the worksheet there. Now, and it did that because you got the actual, your body got the actual organism, but it did cause a certain percentage of death. Now, the next phase is when they talked about Dr. Edward Jenner in Britain, who was doing experiments but didn't understand exactly why his experiments were working. And the reason why he didn't is because he couldn't see viruses in the microscope. Nobody could in the 19th century, not until mid-20th century. He developed vaccination. And so that's the second part. So this is a more recent procedure. And obviously we're going over this slowly and in details because this is part of your question set, right? A little bit more different. Now, why was that different? In your notes from where you watch the program. You can also just go over to the website. If you don't find it real super easy to view it, you can go over to the website that I linked it to there. I understand, because I'm exactly the same as human being, some humans really absorb stuff that shows in media or is moving, and others, they'd really rather read it and click through it. So that's why there's both. So, and in your notes, be sure, what does virus mean from your handout? Virus is a very generic term because they invented it before they knew what it was, before they could see it, before they knew what caused anything. So vaccination, where even did the term vaccine come from? It's a little like, random. Oh my gosh, what a little chuckle there. It isn't as technical as you might think. Okay, so you want to be sure that you have seen that and you've got that in your notes, and you probably do because we wrapped up with that last week. So, and in the handout. And the term vaccine, again, back up to Edward Jenner. What does it come from? Where did he get that word, vaccine? Okay. So let's look at this for the modern world for just a couple moments here. You can watch this on YouTube a little bit. This is a TED Ed. You all, just as a reminder, if you prefer to watch these programs in a different, with the captions in a different language, don't view them in the screens, right, with your classes. Go over to TED, and then when it asks about captioning, Spanish will be in there. There'll be another, a longer list of dominant or real frequently requested languages. But this one, I'm going to see it with the captions in English. So really, again, how does a vaccine stimulate your immune system?
In 1796, the scientist Edward Jenner injected material from a cowpox virus into an 8-year-old boy, with a hunch that this would provide the protection needed to save people from deadly outbreaks of the related smallpox virus. It was a success. The 8-year-old was inoculated against the disease, and this became the first ever vaccine. But why did it work? To understand how vaccines function, we need to know how the immune system defends us against contagious diseases in the first place. When foreign microbes invade us, the immune system triggers a series of responses in an attempt to identify and remove them from our bodies. The signs that this immune response is working are the coughing, sneezing, inflammation, and fever we experience, which work to trap, deter, and rid the body of threatening things like bacteria. These innate immune responses also trigger our second line of defense, called adaptive immunity. Special cells called B cells and T cells are recruited to fight microbes and also record information about them, creating a memory of what the invaders look like and how best to fight them. This know-how becomes handy if the same pathogen invades the body again. But despite this smart response, there's still a risk involved. The body takes time to learn how to respond to pathogens and to build up these defenses. And even then, if a body is too weak or young to fight back when it's invaded, it might face very serious risk if the pathogen is particularly severe. But what if we could prepare the body's immune response, readying it before someone even got ill? This is where vaccines come in. Using the same principles that the body uses to defend itself, scientists use vaccines to trigger the body's adaptive immune system without exposing humans to the full-strength disease. This has resulted in many vaccines, which each work uniquely, separated into many different types. First, we have live attenuated vaccines. These are made of the pathogen itself, but a much weaker and tamer version. Next, we have inactive vaccines, in which the pathogens have been killed. The weakening and inactivation in both types of vaccine ensures that pathogens don't develop into the full-blown disease. But just like a disease, they trigger an immune response, teaching the body to recognize an attack by making a profile of pathogens in preparation. The downside is that live attenuated vaccines can be difficult to make, and because they're live and quite powerful, people with weaker immune systems can't have them, while inactive vaccines don't create long-lasting immunity. Another type, the subunit vaccine, is only made from one part of the pathogen, called an antigen, the ingredient that actually triggers the immune response. By even further isolating specific components of antigens, like proteins or polysaccharides, these vaccines can prompt specific responses. Scientists are now building a whole new range of vaccines called DNA vaccines. For this variety, they isolate the very genes that make the specific antigens the body needs to trigger its immune response to specific pathogens. When injected into the human body, those genes instruct cells in the body to make the antigens. This causes a stronger immune response and prepares the body for any future threats. And because the vaccine only includes specific genetic material, it doesn't contain any other ingredients from the rest of the pathogen that could develop into the disease and harm the patient. If these vaccines become a success, we might be able to build more effective treatments for invasive pathogens in years to come. Just like Edward Jenner's amazing discovery spurred on modern medicine all those decades ago, continuing the development of vaccines might even allow us to treat diseases like HIV, malaria, or Ebola one day.
Okay, folks. All right, I'm going to put it over right now. Right now, Moderna and Pfizer are DNA vaccines. So they only give, I'll just put give the code to your system to create your antibodies. So you all, because this has the format that it has, it's pretty easy to understand and it sort of has these easier to do. I'm going to go ahead and send that link to everybody in my classes in case you might want to use it to help explain to someone you know who is very hesitant or terrified or thinking that it isn't that necessary. So in case some of the people that will, but they're still very nervous. I do have a family member who lives in a really remote area that's not urban in any way, who's really, really terrified of the whole kind of concept, sent that along, talked to her a whole bunch of times on the phone. She's now fully vaccinated and she understands why after her second shot she got some of those responses. So I will send that along because the other thing about it, since it's a TED, if you know someone that needs to watch it in a different language or would even agree to watch it in another language, you can pull up those captions as well. So maybe that would be helpful because once you're vaccinated, especially with these DNA vaccines, the chances that even if it gets in your system, it could cause you to get to be severely ill into the hospital or maybe die become right? Almost no chance at all for those. Okay, now with variolation or inoculation, they discovered initially in the Middle East that scratching that pathogen from that, right, taking pus and putting it onto the skin and scratching it on the surface of your skin, not only made it so you were less likely to die, you never got sick from it ever again. And so this is a variolator, but it has a very long history. You've probably seen some of these things that are called lancets. Um, these where they scratch. Some of them are like a little trident kind of thing, still in use today. Some diseases are so dangerous that you would never put the vaccination in your bloodstream. And that's not what it does. It puts it on the skin. Why are they putting it on the skin? Same thing they talked about in the film for smallpox, is this one is even more dangerous than COVID, because this can likes anything that's internal. It loves your lungs, your breathing tract. It gets all over in other places in your body. Remember in the program it says if you do an autopsy on the people, their organs are blistered. It's on your heart. Once it's inside, uncontrollable really for this one. But on your skin, the species Orthopox variola major does not do as well or survive as well in that habitat. So if you just put this on your skin, it gives your body a lot more time to make those lock and key antibodies, and it worked. And you, because it had already met exactly the disease, lifetime immunity. And for you all, for like shout out to all kinds of things that have been tampered down and not in public consciousness. Who was the first person to really share this information to someone who had a social role that could share it? It was a person who was a slave, right? Purchased from a slave market that told the white person buyer in what is now the United States in the East Coast that he'd already been variolated and was not going to get sick. So again, what's the origin of our science of this in the US? Yeah, somebody whose life was significantly negatively and unfairly impacted, but still gave along that benefit to the future. Okay, so that's a variolator. So again, so here it is today. That's not an ancient tool. You can see it right now. Sometimes they're in sort of guns, but they do the same thing. They just give a little, just in your skin, a little scratch. Here is the smallpox virus, right? Those pustules or blisters, even on a heart. Again, don't want to show you images of things that are going to make people too nervous about humans. So this is a chicken's heart, but right, we're related to all the other vertebrates and so forth. So here you can see, this is a real recent photo. Some individuals still today have a very strong reaction to smallpox vaccine. In the film, it talks about how smallpox was attacked and destroyed, genocide destroyed by the World Health Organization, with the last natural infection included in the late 1970s. And then the World Health Organization announced in 1980, after 3 years of no infections anywhere on the planet, for any zone, for any social class level or income rate and all of that, that they could go ahead and destroy all their samples of the disease because it was gone. They had caused it to go extinct. However, that didn't happen in the 1980s. And at the end part of the program, something that might be of giant interest for others of you with different majors, it became clear with a person who left the what's Russia today and was the Soviet Union, that in some parts of the world there were laboratories that were still growing it, mutated versions that they were planning on using for biological weapons, and they were making gargantuan amounts of it and selling it, right? That's what the purpose was. So today, the only individuals that are still getting smallpox vaccination are those working in emergency contexts and in some roles or jobs in the military. So I actually have had over the years quite a few students who had a smallpox vaccination. And they did know people where it really blew up. Their body just went nuts and had trouble controlling it. However, the death rate now is less than 2% and really not likely that you would die from it. They can, right, do more with your immune system and help you to survive the fevers and some of the other things that are going on. So, but the general public is not vaccinated because it is not a natural disease anymore. So because though it's so significantly dangerous, it does produce scarring. So some of you might have great grandparents or have seen photos of individuals on their upper arm or in their inner leg. Sometimes in some areas of the world, especially for girl babies, they'd give the vaccination on the inner thigh with the inoculator because they knew it was going to make a scar. So, but this is very, very common, but now disappearing. This would only be on people that have been vaccinated in the 1970s because it hasn't been a regular, or around the early 1980s, it hasn't been a regular or natural disease for humans. And then some people really, that big scar and some other things going on with scar tissue there. So in photos of people surviving it, and you'll see this, and it's just right heart-wrenching to see it. A lot of those early photographs of tribal members here in North America, you'll see that person after person after person has these dent-like scars all over the face or the neck that you can see in the black and white photos. And those are smallpox survivors. But that's what, they mentioned it in the film, that's what everybody in Europe looked like. They just didn't paint it into the paintings. Everybody around the world that had it and survived it had little dents and scars all over them. They'd never go away. So smallpox vaccine is the only way to prevent this, because that's how vaccines are. They are preventative. They don't do really anything too much if you get it after you're already infected. They do something, especially with the DNA ones, but they don't do all that they could be if you have them ahead of time. And so smallpox vaccine is made from a related virus, orthopox virus vaccinia, but it can't cause the disease in case you're in the military and you've had this. And it helps your body develop antibodies, immunity to smallpox. And this is what they use to eradicate smallpox from humans all over the world. And the program's great, right? It's talking about all the people that volunteered years of their time to help the world become healthy. Okay, now, why is it that we're not still doing this? Why are we not still trying to make diseases like viruses? We probably wouldn't even try to do this for bacteria, but like for viruses, why aren't we still trying to make a virus extinct? And here's just a good, simple, nothing that's going to be specifics for testing, just the overall concept of what happens with these agents of natural selection in a population. So if we look real closely here on just this side, a little bit pixelated, but work fine. So in India, for instance, super, super crowding, many people under every circumstance is living, for instance, in shared sleeping rooms, because culturally, for a lot of the subcultures of India, that's just the way that they prefer to do it. Working with their hands, really close contact with each other, and so forth. And the second largest, most densely populated area in the world, if they looked at the infant mortality rate, let's say beginning in the this early phase of it, and saw that they were losing uh, almost 140 children per thousand in India after, right? So if we see here would be 1980s, and then up until the teens, up just before the teens, if they looked at infant mortality rate, you can see that it dramatically dropped, that the disease went down. So a lot of children were surviving that weren't surviving before. But what happened to overall society? Did it improve the did it improve life overall in India? So here's about the same time. So we have more children being born and surviving, right? So emotionally, fantastic for the parents and for the families. But with the eradication of smallpox around the world, knowing that far more children are going to survive, you're going to need in 20 years far more housing, far more schools, far more doctors, a lot more food, a lot more water, a lot more assistance, right? And they didn't do that. So they have this massively escalating population because they took out one of the biggest um, things going on in the population that was keeping their population more stable over time. And the outcome is a massive increase in other things that make life very difficult to navigate, and a massive increase in crowding, poverty, lack of resources, not being able to access education, healthy jobs, and that sort of thing. So we have not tried to work together to do this again. Instead, what we've really worked on, and they talk about it in the program, is identifying vectors. And you all, that is what the outcome or the purpose then of understanding. Let me go, I'm just make this do this way. Whoops. And then we'll go back to this in a second. I need to pull up my thing just real briefly to wrap up. Make it a little bit easier to do our last slide. Okay. Going back to share. And hello, we're almost done here. Yeah, all right. All right. So rather, instead of trying to put together that massive amount of teams and work groups and funding and a lot of wealthy nations agreeing to work together to do this, then there are some other ways that we've worked towards this. And of course, part of the reason why also that we haven't initiated any real super effective, there are some effective ways to kind of manage these things for diseases for humans, is because it's very difficult right now to get countries to work together. There was a small phase when they were doing a little bit better. So now what we're looking for is managing vectors, and that's what masks are for, and that was what the shutdown was for. And still in the United States, we had 600,000 deaths of people that were, even if they weren't super healthy to begin with, they certainly weren't going to die right now from what they had. So really, really impactful. Okay, last three looks at these three vocabulary words, and we'll call it a morning. So inoculation, vaccination, and immunization. For the general public, they are often used interchangeably, but they technically don't have exactly the same meaning. The reason I would like us to look at them is that the difference might seem like semantic, right? Like small scale differences in definitions. However, when you use them really correctly, or you know that they are separate, then what you read or what they send along to you from your healthcare provider or healthcare system, or looking to know what it is that you need to have going on, or even understand what your doctor, nurse, um, and a clinic is telling you about, it can be helpful. Okay, so last look on this for us all. So vaccination. So again, vaccination is when you introduce a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease. So vaccination starts with Jenner, and the quick video we just looked at, vaccination is going to stimulate the immune system to make those antibodies, those T cells, B cells that you need. Next one. Immunization with a Z or an S. Both of them are used, it just depends on where you are. Immunization is what they were originally doing with variolation in the Middle East, way earlier than vaccination. And what they were doing was fortifying your immune system. And they were fortifying your immune system by giving you a small sample of the invader. So that's when they were scratching it on the actual virus onto the skin. In vaccination, they were giving you a sample of something related that helped your body to recognize that invader a little bit early. Immunization or variolation gave lifetime immunity. Vaccination, most of them do not give lifetime immunity. That's why you need booster shots. We don't know right now with coronavirus vaccines, so it's not sure, but probably, at least for the now, getting a booster, because this one is so dangerous and does produce death or prolonged problems in health for little kids through super seniors. Yeah, so we'll probably do boosters for this. And what do both of them do? They're trying to get your system to improve T cells, B cells, and antibodies that are being produced. So those, right, your immune agents. Okay,